A man in a business suit calmly walks down the rear stairs of a Boeing 727, clutching $200,000 in cash. The plane is flying at 10,000 feet through a freezing rainstorm over the Pacific Northwest. He's wearing loafers, a thin suit, and a parachute that can't be steered. Then he jumps into the darkness and vanishes without a trace. This isn't a Hollywood movie. This actually happened. More than 50 years later, nobody knows who he was, whether he survived, or where he went. This is the story of D.B. Cooper, the only unsolved hijacking in American aviation history. Today, we're taking a deep dive into this mystery, from the moment a quiet man bought a plane ticket with cash to the daring mid-air escape that baffled investigators for decades. This is the D.B. Cooper mystery. November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. Northwest Orient Airlines is bustling with travelers heading home for the holiday. At the Northwest Orient Airlines counter, a nondescript man approaches. He's wearing a black business suit, a white shirt, a narrow black tie, and dark sunglasses. He appears to be in his mid-40s, about 6 feet tall with dark hair. He pays $18.52 in cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington. The flight time? 30 minutes. When asked for his name, he replies simply, Dan Cooper. There's no security screening, no metal detectors, no identification required. This is 1971, and air travel is a completely different world. Cooper boards Northwest Orient Flight 305, carrying a black attaché case and a brown paper bag. He takes seat 18E in the very last row of the Boeing 727 aircraft. The plane has 36 passengers and a crew of 6. As the aircraft sits on the tarmac preparing for departure, Cooper orders a drink from flight attendant Florence Schaffner, bourbon and 7-Up. He lights a cigarette and appears completely calm. Then, shortly after takeoff at 2:50 p.m., everything changes. Cooper hands a note to Florence Schaffner. At first, she assumes it's a lonely businessman trying to flirt with her and slips it into her pocket without reading it. But Cooper leans forward and says quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner pulls out the note and reads it. Her blood runs cold. The note says, "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit next to me. You are being hijacked." With trembling hands, Schaffner sits down next to Cooper. He opens his attaché case just wide enough for her to see inside. She glimpses a mass of red cylinders and wires. It looks exactly like what a bomb would look like. Cooper's voice is calm, almost polite. He tells Schaffner to write down his demands exactly as he says them. She pulls out her notepad and he dictates, "I want $200,000 in $20 bills. I want 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserves. When we land in Seattle, I want a fuel truck standing by to refuel the aircraft." Why 4 parachutes? Authorities on the ground would later realize the brilliance of this request. By asking for 4 parachutes, Cooper made them believe he might take a hostage with him when he jumped. This meant they couldn't sabotage the parachutes with faulty equipment because they'd risk killing an innocent person. Schaffner takes the note to the cockpit. Captain William Scott, First Officer Bob Ratichak, and Flight Engineer H.E. Anderson read it in stunned silence. They immediately radio Seattle Air Control. The response is swift. The president of Northwest Orient Airlines is contacted. The FBI is notified. Seattle police scramble into action, but they have a problem. It's going to take time to gather $200,000 in $20 bills and locate 4 parachutes. So Captain Scott makes an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor mechanical difficulty. We'll be circling Seattle for a short time while we resolve the issue." Most of the passengers have no idea they're being hijacked. For nearly 2 hours, Flight 305 circles above Seattle, while the authorities work frantically on the ground. The FBI contacts local banks to gather the ransom money. They recruit a local skydiving instructor named Earl Causey to provide the parachutes. Every $20 bill is photographed and the serial numbers are recorded. Meanwhile, 30,000 feet in the air, Cooper sits calmly in his seat, smoking cigarettes and occasionally sipping his drink. Flight attendants later describe him as polite, even courteous. He never raises his voice. He never appears nervous. When Schaffner asks if she can see his bomb more clearly, he opens the case again. She later described seeing 8 red cylinders in 2 rows of 4, connected by wires to a large battery. The FBI assembles the ransom in a canvas bank bag. $200,000 in $20 bills weighs approximately 21 pounds. The parachutes are carefully selected, 2 primary back parachutes and 2 reserve front parachutes. At 5:24 p.m., the ground crew radios Captain Scott. "We have the money and the parachutes. You're cleared to land." Cooper has specific instructions for the landing. The cabin lights must be dimmed, no vehicles can approach the aircraft. A single unarmed Northwest Orient employee must drive out alone with the money and the parachutes. The 727 taxis to a remote, brightly lit area of the tarmac, exactly as Cooper demanded. The passengers crane their necks to see what's happening, still unaware they've been hijacked for the past 3 hours. Cooper orders flight attendant Tina Mucklow to go to the rear stairs and receive the delivery. A Northwest Airlines employee drives a company car to the aircraft. Mucklow lowers the stairs, and the employee hands up the canvas bag containing the money and the 4 parachutes. Cooper inspects everything carefully. He opens one of the parachutes to examine it, checking for any signs of sabotage. Then he makes his next demand: release all the passengers and 2 of the flight attendants. Keep only the flight crew and Tina Mucklow. As the 36 passengers deplane, they're confused but relieved. Most still don't know they've just survived a hijacking. It's only when they reach the terminal and see dozens of FBI agents and police officers that they realize something serious has happened. Now it's just Cooper, the 3-man flight crew, and Tina Mucklow, alone on the aircraft. And that's when Cooper reveals the next phase of his plan. It's now approaching 7 p.m. on Thanksgiving Eve over the Pacific Northwest. Cooper's instructions are precise and reveal an intimate knowledge of the Boeing 727. He tells the flight crew, "We're going to Mexico City. Fly at minimum speed, gear down, flaps at 15 degrees, maintain an altitude of 10,000 feet or lower. The rear stairs must remain down. Cabin pressure must be equalized to match outside pressure. Do not turn on the cabin lights, and everyone on the flight crew stays forward of the first-class curtain." Captain Scott protests, "We can't take off with the rear stairs down. It's aerodynamically impossible." Cooper's response is chilling in its expertise. "Yes, you can. Just put them down after you're airborne." This statement reveals something crucial. Cooper knows the 727's capabilities better than most passengers would know. The Boeing 727 is the only commercial aircraft of its era with built-in rear stairs that can be lowered during flight. This isn't common knowledge. This is something a pilot, a flight engineer, or someone with specialized aircraft knowledge would know. The crew also explains that they can't fly all the way to Mexico City without refueling. Cooper agrees to a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. At 7:37 p.m., Flight 305 takes off again. The plane carries only 5 people now: the 3-man flight crew in the cockpit, Tina Mucklow, and Cooper. Cooper orders Mucklow to join the flight crew in the cockpit and stay there. Before she goes, she notices that Cooper has been working on something. He's taken apart one of the reserve parachutes and using the nylon cord to tie the canvas bag containing the money around his body. "Go to the cockpit and don't come back," Cooper tells her. His voice is still calm, still polite. Mucklow goes forward and closes the curtains separating the first-class cabin from the rest of the plane. The crew can't see what Cooper is doing in the back of the aircraft. Meanwhile, on the ground, the FBI is in full crisis mode. They've scrambled military aircraft to follow Flight 305. F-106 fighter jets are initially deployed, but there's a problem. These jets are designed to fly at over 1,500 miles per hour. Flight 305 is cruising at barely 170 miles per hour with its landing gear down and flaps extended. the fighter jets can't fly slowly enough to keep pace. The military quickly switches to T-33 trainer aircraft, which can fly at lower speeds. But in the darkness and rain, maintaining visual contact with the 727 is nearly impossible. Inside the cockpit, the flight crew is monitoring their instruments carefully. They've been ordered by the FBI to watch for any signs that Cooper has jumped. At approximately 8 p.m., about 25 minutes after takeoff from Seattle, they notice something. The aircraft's tail section suddenly lifts upward. The cabin pressure changes briefly. An indicator light shows that the rear door is open. Captain Scott immediately tries to contact Cooper via the intercom. No response. He tries again. Still nothing. At 8:13 p.m., there's another change in air pressure and another movement of the tail section. This is consistent with weight being removed from the rear stairs. The crew believes Cooper has jumped, but they can't be certain. They continue flying toward Reno as instructed, arriving at 10:15 p.m. As soon as the plane lands, FBI agents and police officers swarm the aircraft with weapons drawn. They find the plane empty except for the flight crew and Tina Mucklow. In the cabin, they discover Cooper's black clip-on tie, his mother-of-pearl tie clip, 2 of the 4 parachutes, including 1 reserve parachute that had been cannibalized for its nylon cords, the brown paper bag, 8 cigarette butts, no bomb. The briefcase with the so-called bomb is gone. No Dan Cooper, no parachute, and most importantly, no money. $200,000 has vanished into the night sky somewhere over the forests of Washington state. The FBI immediately launches one of the largest manhunts in American history. They name it Operation Norjack, Northwest Hijacking. By analyzing the flight data, wind conditions, and the exact time of the pressure changes, the FBI estimates that Cooper jumped somewhere over the wilderness of southwestern Washington, near the town of Ariel, just north of the Oregon border. The jump zone is calculated to be near Lake Merwin, in the shadow of Mount St. Helens. But here's the terrifying reality of what Cooper did. He jumped at night in freezing rain over densely forested wilderness from 10,000 feet. The winds at that altitude were over 200 miles per hour. He was wearing a business suit, a thin raincoat, and loafers. The parachute he used was a military surplus NB-8, which cannot be steered. It's designed for emergency bailouts, not precision landings. Even experienced paratroopers would consider this jump extraordinarily dangerous. Jumping at night into trees is a nightmare scenario. The risk of getting tangled in branches, breaking bones, or being impaled is extremely high. And even if Cooper survived the landing, he'd be in the middle of nowhere, soaking wet in near freezing temperatures, carrying 21 pounds of cash. The day after Thanksgiving, the U.S. Army deployed over 1,000 troops to search the area. Helicopters scoured the forests. Search parties combed through the wilderness on foot. The FBI used the SR-71 Blackbird, America's fastest spy plane, to photograph the entire flight path from high altitude. They found nothing. No parachute, no body, no money, no trace of Dan Cooper whatsoever. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The FBI's investigation into D.B. Cooper became one of the most extensive in Bureau history. Over the next 5 years, they would interview hundreds of people and examine over 800 suspects. But first, they had to figure out who this man really was. The name Dan Cooper appeared to be an alias. Interestingly, the press made an error early in the investigation. A reporter misheard the name as D.B. Cooper instead of Dan Cooper, and the incorrect name stuck. To this day, he's known worldwide as D.B. Cooper, even though he never used that name. The FBI had some evidence to work with. They had detailed descriptions from multiple flight attendants who had spent hours with Cooper. They had his fingerprints from the in-flight magazine he'd been reading. They had the tie and tie clip he left behind, and they had cigarette butts with his saliva. From this evidence, they created a profile. White male, mid-40s, approximately 6 feet tall, 170 to 180 pounds, dark hair, brown eyes. He appeared to have military training or experience with aircraft. He was calm under pressure. He was polite and soft-spoken. He knew how to operate a parachute, and he had extensive knowledge of the Boeing 727. The FBI also analyzed the physical evidence for clues. In the 2000s, scientists examined Cooper's tie using electron microscopy. What they found was astonishing. The tie was covered with over 100,000 microscopic particles, including rare metals like pure titanium, high-grade stainless steel, and bismuth. These materials suggested Cooper might have worked in a specialized industry like aerospace, chemical engineering, or metallurgy. But despite all this evidence, the FBI couldn't identify Cooper. Every lead seemed to hit a dead end. Fingerprints didn't match anyone in the database. Hundreds of suspects were investigated and eliminated. Then, on February 10, 1980, 9 years after the hijacking, there was a breakthrough. 8-year-old Brian Ingram was on a family camping trip along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. He was helping dig a fire pit in the sandy beach at a place called Tina Bar when his fingers touched something unusual. He pulled out 3 packets of deteriorating $20 bills, still bound by rubber bands. The serial numbers matched. It was Cooper's ransom money, $5,800 in total. The FBI descended on Tina Bar immediately. They conducted extensive searches of the area, both on land and in the water, but they found no additional money, no parachute, no remains. The discovery of the money raised more questions than it answered. Tina Bar was about 20 miles away from the suspected jump zone. How did the money get there? There were 3 main theories. Theory 1, Cooper died in the jump and his body and the money eventually washed down the Columbia River system, where the money became buried in sediment at Tina Bar. Theory 2, Cooper survived but dropped or lost the money bag during the jump and it naturally ended up in the river through groundwater or flooding. Theory 3, Cooper survived and deliberately planted the money at Tina Bar to throw off investigators. In 2020, scientists analyzed diatoms, microscopic algae on the bills. Their findings were surprising. The diatoms present only bloom in spring, not in November when Cooper jumped. This suggested the money entered the water several months after the hijacking, not immediately. But it still didn't answer the fundamental question: did Cooper survive? Over the decades, the Cooper case became a cultural phenomenon. Books were written, movies were made, documentaries explored every angle. In Portland, there's an annual D.B. Cooper Days celebration. He became a folk hero to some, an anti-establishment Robin Hood figure who outsmarted the FBI and the entire U.S. government. But the investigation continued. The FBI examined hundreds of suspects. Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Airlines employee and military veteran who bore a resemblance to the composite sketch and died in 1994. Dwayne Weber, who confessed to his wife at his deathbed in 1995 that he was Cooper, though the FBI found his claims lacked credibility. Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam War pilot and convicted criminal who was investigated multiple times. Some amateur investigators were convinced Rackstraw was Cooper, though he denied it until his death in 2019. William Gossett, a U.S. Army veteran and skydiver whose family suspected his involvement, and many others. By 2016, the FBI had officially investigated the case for 45 years. They had looked at every angle, pursued every credible lead, and came up empty. On July 12, 2016, the FBI made an announcement. They were suspending active investigation of the D.B. Cooper case. They would, however, keep the case file open and pursue any new credible physical evidence that emerged. The only unsolved hijacking in American aviation history would remain unsolved. Or would it? In 2020, something remarkable happened. 2 siblings, Shantae and Richard McCoy III, decided to break their decades-long silence. Their father was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a Vietnam War veteran, experienced paratrooper and helicopter pilot, and they believed with absolute certainty that their father was D.B. Cooper. Here's why their story matters. 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, on April 7, 1972, Richard McCoy Jr. hijacked a United Wolf flight in almost identical manner. He boarded in Denver, threatened the crew with what appeared to be a hand grenade, demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes, released the passengers in San Francisco, and then parachuted out over Utah. Unlike Cooper, McCoy was caught within 72 hours. An anonymous tip led to him. They raided his home and found $499,970 of the ransom money, skydiving equipment, and evidence linking him to the crime. McCoy was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison, but in 1974 he escaped from a maximum security federal penitentiary by hijacking a garbage truck with fellow inmates. 3 months later, the FBI tracked him to Virginia Beach, where he was killed in a shootout. The similarities between the Cooper and McCoy hijackings were impossible to ignore. Both used Boeing's 727 aircraft, both demanded money and parachutes, both released passengers after receiving the ransom, both jumped from the rear stairs. The methodology was nearly identical. The FBI had investigated McCoy as a potential Cooper suspect, but ruled him out for several reasons. McCoy was only 29 years old in 1971, while Cooper was described as being in his mid-40s. McCoy had prominent ears, which didn't match witness descriptions, and, according to his family, McCoy had an alibi. He was home in Utah having Thanksgiving dinner the day after the Cooper hijacking. But Shantae and Richard McCoy III never believed their father was innocent of the Cooper crime. They waited, though. They waited because they believed their mother, Karen McCoy, had been complicit in both hijackings. They didn't want to implicate her. After Karen died in 2020, the siblings finally felt free to come forward. They contacted Dan Grider, a retired pilot, experienced skydiver, and amateur D.B. Cooper investigator who had spent over 20 years researching the case. What they showed him was stunning. In an outbuilding on the family's property in North Carolina, they had discovered a modified military parachute and harness. It was an NB-8 military surplus rig, the exact type provided to Cooper in 1971. But this wasn't just any parachute. It had specific, unique modifications. The ripcord handle had been moved from the left side to the right, certain straps had been cut, D-rings had been added, and the carrying bag had been enlarged. These modifications matched the exact specifications of the parachute that had been modified by Earl Cossey, the skydiving instructor who provided Cooper's parachutes. Grider examined the parachute and called it literally 1 in a billion due to its unique configuration. The Cooper children also provided a skydiving logbook that, according to them, placed their father in the exact areas of both hijackings at the relevant times. In September 2023, Grider and Rick McCoy traveled to Richmond, Virginia to meet with FBI agents. They handed over the parachute, the harness, and the logbook. For the first time since officially closing the case in 2016, the FBI took action. They accepted the evidence, they began to investigate, and in late 2023, they conducted a search of the McCoy family property in North Carolina. The Bureau also requested DNA samples from McCoy's children. The goal? Compare the DNA to the genetic material extracted from Cooper's tie and cigarette butts. As of now, the DNA results have not been publicly released. The FBI has not made any official statements about the investigation, but the fact that they reopened the case at all is significant. Some retired FBI agents who worked the case have publicly stated they believe McCoy was Cooper. Nick O'Hara, the agent who shot and killed McCoy in 1974, told investigators, "When I shot Richard McCoy, I shot D.B. Cooper at the same time." But not everyone agrees. Some investigators point out that McCoy had a solid alibi for the day after the Cooper hijacking. Others argue that the physical descriptions don't match closely enough, and some believe Cooper simply couldn't have survived the jump, and that his body remains somewhere in the Washington wilderness, never to be found. D.B. Cooper case reminds us that some mysteries can still endure. Perhaps we'll never know for certain who he was. Perhaps that's exactly how it should be. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of aviation's greatest mysteries, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories from American history. In the comments below, tell us what you think. Did D.B. Cooper survive? Was it Richard McCoy? Or is the truth something we haven't even considered yet? Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth is out there, waiting to be discovered.